as hundreds of thousands of Iranians flood the streets, questioning the legitimacy of the presidential elections and demanding change, Washington denounced the crackdown on protesters.
I strongly condemn these unjust actions.
After the supreme leader rejected all compromise. What will become of Iran, its regional influence,
Allahu Akbar,
and the promise of engagements with the United States?
Assalamu alaikum.
This is Empire. Hello and welcome to Empire. I am Marwan Bishara. President Ahmadinejad's landslide electoral victory, following Washington's willingness to engage him on the basis of mutual respect and mutual interest, made the Iranian leader untouchable. But within hours, all changed as protesters poured into the street, denouncing the government for rigging the elections. For 3 decades, the regime argued that its legitimacy lies in its just Islamic rule, unpopular as it may have been in the West. But harsh accusations of authoritarian rule during the election campaigns, followed by angry and violent protests in their aftermath, have unveiled deep-rooted and popular discontent. The escalation of the last few days will have lasting effect on the Iranian regime and on its standing among friends and foes alike. How the Iranian establishment goes about trying to regain credibility, whether by reconciliation or retribution, opening up or closing in, will have important ramifications on Iran's regional and international relations. Before we discuss this and much more, Tim Tate reports on decades of turmoil in Iran.
It is a nation on a knife edge.
Iran considers itself to be a major country in the world.
The slogan was neither East nor West, only the Islamic Republic.
Iran has lost an empire and has yet to find a role.
Distrusted and denounced for 30 years.
An axis of evil.
And facing unprecedented internal unrest. Iran today is a hostage to its history. Caught between the ambition to be a world power and the legacy of centuries of colonial exploitation.
This has really got under the skin, it's in the blood, that we are a great power. We have contributed a great deal in terms of civilizational achievements to the world, and yet we've been ritually humiliated in a way.
That humiliation began with the discovery of oil. For 50 years, a British petrol company paid Tehran a pittance to ravage its resources.
The Iranians were getting less money from the oil that was being exploited from their territory than the Anglo-Iranian oil company was paying in taxes to the exchequer.
When Iran's parliament voted to nationalize the oil industry, America and Britain engineered a coup d'etat, replacing democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh with the more pliable Shah.
In the middle of the Cold War, the United States played a role in the overthrow of a democratically elected Iranian government.
This was entirely an invented coup by the CIA and MI6 with the Shah's connivance, and the Iranians saw him as a lackey. They saw him as a stooge.
But in 1979, the world changed forever. The charismatic Ayatollah Khomeini led a popular uprising of anti-American nationalists and devout Shia students. They fought and defeated the Shah's Western-backed army. Khomeini took the reins of the world's first Islamic Republic, sending shockwaves throughout the Middle East.
The revolution showed that it is possible to overthrow a pro-Western, essentially dictatorship. And Iran wanted to export the revolution, and it did support resistance movements throughout the region.
But the region fought back. When Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, Gulf states joined forces with America and the West to supply Iraq's army. Even when Saddam used chemical weapons, Arab countries backed him against Iran. More than 1 million people died in the 8-year war. Tehran learnt a painful lesson. To become top dog in a region dominated by its rivals, Iran would need to cultivate grassroots support within their populations. And the repeated failure of Arab nations to protect the Palestinians provided a perfect opportunity.
Iran was able to use a kind of rhetoric that appealed to the Arab street, which Arab leaders were incapable of employing, because that is precisely the language which had led to 3 or 4 unsuccessful military campaigns against Israel.
But rather than send in its own forces to fight Israel and its American backers, Tehran works through proxies.
Hezbollah or Hamas or numerous nameless groups that we don't know in the region are fed and employed in order to fend off American and regional interference that could counter the interest of the Islamic Republic and lead to its downfall.
Tehran's influence now stretches from Lebanon to Iraq, Saudi Arabia to Pakistan. And ironically, America's military adventures have eased its path.
In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
It's a testament to the woeful grand strategic thinking in the White House during the Bush years, that they dealt with every serious threat power on Iran's periphery, but never thought to realize that this might help Iran.
But Tehran's ambitions may yet be blocked by its own actions. President Ahmadinejad has squandered its oil wealth. 17% unemployment and inflation above 23% has fueled protests on the streets. The dream of fulfilling Iran's self-declared destiny may need to wait a while.
To help us understand Iran and the current escalation, I have with me in the studio Professor Mansour Farhang, Professor of International Relations, the first ambassador of the Islamic Republic to the United Nations.
Yes.
As well as Hamid Dabash, also a professor of Iranian studies at Columbia University and author of numerous books on Iran, and Flint Leverett, a senior fellow at the New America Foundation and a former director of Middle East Affairs at the Bush White House, as well as Robert Malley, the director of the Middle East program at the International Crisis Group and a regular contributor to the New York Review of Books. And I must mention that you were also a Middle East assistant specialist at the Clinton White House. Gentlemen, welcome to Empire.
Thank you for having me.
I would like to start with a very simple question, probably with our Iranian friends. What is it exactly that led to this escalation? Is it a rigged election, or is it pent-up violence and frustration by the Iranians throughout the last 3 decades? Hamid?
Well, I think it's a combination of both. That is, I think this particular election is the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. This is obviously a pent-up anger that has been accumulating, certainly from the very beginning of the Islamic Revolution, but you could see traces of it during the presidential election of 1997 that resulted in the surprised win of President Khatami.
Landslide.
Exactly, and then that came to surprise to many people. And soon after that, it is very important to keep it in mind even today that we see these demonstrations targeting Ahmadinejad.
But he certainly won these elections.
Well,
or not?
I mean, I fall in the camp that I believe the assumption that this election is rigged is now a social fact. And speculation, was it rigged or was it not rigged, is Monday morning quarterbacking and of some academic futility.
Professor Farhang, is it a question just of social economic, or is there a problem with the regime itself? Is it a question of changing the president or changing the regime?
The 1979 revolution was supposed to satisfy the frustrations of the Iranian society, that is, create a political order that is sufficiently inclusive so that Iranians could
and
participate.
Has it succeeded in doing that?
That's what I want to say. And also to be independent in terms of making decisions without being a client of a foreign power. Iran has become an independent state, and Iranians are learning that independence is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for creation of a civil society. The second objective of the revolution, that has to do with democratic aspirations and values. Regrettably, it has been a complete failure. And yet, connecting it to the question you raised, they invented a way of generating public interest in politics, and that was establishment of competitive elections in an autocratic society. Iran is the only dictatorship in the world in which genuine and real competitive elections take place, in the sense that...
You know, I actually noticed that, Flint, when Khamenei spoke on Friday's sermon to say that this election is right, and in the Islamic Republic of Iran we don't rig elections. What I've noticed is that he basically said, look, I've nominated these candidates and they're going to be working for me. So what are you complaining about in Iran or outside Iran?
I think that Khamenei was laying down a very clear red line, in the sense that it is okay to for candidates to bring concerns about what they think were irregularities in the voting process or the counting process, to bring those to the table through the Guardian Council, through the legal channels, if you will, within the Islamic Republic. But he was not going to countenance a challenge to the system itself, to the Islamic Republic as a whole. And, you know, frankly, I don't see anything in what's unfolded since the June 12th elections that would lead me to think that a majority of Iranians want the Islamic Republic to implode. Some of them may want the Islamic Republic to evolve, even in some very, very substantial ways. But I think the constituency that wants to get rid of the Islamic Republic is really a pretty small part of Iranian society.
But are they, Rob, maybe trying to reform the Islamic Republic, not just change the presidency? Apparently there's many problems, and especially when you hear people calling for the fall of the dictator, that does certainly sound reminiscent of 1979. So is this going beyond election into reforming a system of governance?
It seems to me that in Iran, the elections under the Islamic Republic haven't really had a representation function as we would understand it in the West. The point was not to have a full a variety of candidates and you choose somebody who's going to represent you. They had more of a stabilization and legitimation function. It was a way, as was just said, to legitimize a system by having the people have a degree of choice, but within very clear confines. And elections in that sense were not really free as we would define them. There was always a degree of fraud, whether from the front end or the back end. What's different in this case is, number one, the degree of fraud, which seems to have really exceeded what has taken place in the past, and the fact that the people simply don't buy it. And what you're seeing, therefore, is the end of that function of the elections. In fact, the elections had the opposite effect. They haven't stabilized the regime, they have destabilized it. And I think that's why this is a very important moment in the history of the Republic.
Marwan, I think it is not fair to say that in Khamenei's speech, Khamenei says, I nominated these people. We have to bring the constituency, the people, into the game. There are people in Iran who are taking the letter of the constitution, namely their constitutional rights, even within an Islamic Republic, seriously. There were upwards of 500 people applying to the Guardian Council to run for presidency. They vet them, they decide, yes, you can go, you can not go. My point is not to disagree that ultimately these 4 people who run for presidency were approved by Khamenei. But the pressure that is coming and is building from below, in varieties of ways, institutionally acceptable, institutionally non-acceptable, putting into the streets, writing weblogs, etc., is also a critical factor. And this is 30 years in the making. I quite agree that within Iran, not outside Iran, within Iran, the percentage of people who want to change the regime and have a new revolution, etc., even if they exist, is very minimal.
How much does Mousavi have control over these
There are two important points to understand. First, definitely the elections are undemocratic, unfree, but competitive. This situation led to division within the regime, not only concerning power struggle, but also the issue of what do we need to do in order to protect the regime against growing dissatisfaction of the general public, economic incompetence, expansion of the population, unemployment, on and on and on, a variety of socio-economic.
But Professor
that a country
Farhan,
like Iran has today nearly 4 million drug addicts suggests that there are serious socio-economic problems. And then this situation is the byproduct of a variety of factors that Mousavi is not the leader of this movement. Mousavi is the creation, is led by this movement, and the regime does not have an uncontested leader. That is very unique in Iran.
Not even Ali Khamenei.
Not at all. Not even. He is probably more powerful, the most powerful individual among the elite, but by no means uncontested.
Flint Leverett, I want to ask you about Ahmadinejad. Right after we see a report, especially prepared by Nazneen Moshiri, on a very apparently misunderstood president.
President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is a walking, talking contradiction.
No one has the right to project their own cowardice on the great Iranian nation.
He's the self-proclaimed radical who, during the 1979 revolution, was a voice of moderation, arguing against taking American embassy personnel hostage. He's portrayed as the political representative of Iran's conservative clerics, yet in reality doesn't have their wholehearted support.
Senior clergymen in Rome didn't warm up to him, and still they're trying to keep their distance.
He's built a power base through Iran's Revolutionary Guard, but it's less about military muscle than naked commerce.
Ahmadinejad has been helping the Revolutionary Guard to win contracts in the economic sphere, and on the other hand, the Revolutionary Guards are helping Ahmadinejad stay in power, basically.
Ahmadinejad is the son of a blacksmith who portrays himself as a straight-laced man of the people, fighting the evils of Western capitalism.
We will not accept abjectness in the face of corrupt people and thieves.
And for the populist Iranian president, there's no such thing as bad Western publicity.
Just as the Soviet Union was wiped out and today does not exist, so will the Zionist regime soon be wiped out.
He thinks by doing this he's putting two fingers in the eyes of the Israelis, but there's no mileage in it for Iran.
While antagonizing Western sensitivities, he's established warm working relationships with most of the world's emerging economies. But as the pressure builds internally, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad may finally have to show his true colours.
If Professor Farhan is correct that the system now is broken in two, what are President Ahmadinejad's choices today?
I'm not sure I'd accept the premise that the system is broken in two, but if you look at it from Ahmadinejad's perspective, I personally don't believe that he should see his situation as being under some really significant strain. He continues to enjoy, by all public manifestations, the support and the legitimation of the supreme leader. The system as a whole, all of the major institutions of the system are standing behind him and are acknowledging that he is the legitimately elected president of Iran.
The fact that Khatami, former president, Rafsanjani, former president, Mousavi, and all these demonstrators on the streets of Iran don't constitute, with their followers, both in the assembly and in the Council of the Guidance, some sort of a split in the leadership or in the establishment in Iran?
I've seen no indication that Rafsanjani, Khatami, even Mr. Mousavi himself are really prepared to go to the mat to oppose the supreme leader directly, to oppose the institutions
not even
Islamic
going to the
Republic
demonstration
directly.
After he said no one should demonstrate in the streets against the elections. They defied him.
You could read it that way, but I also see that since Khamenei made that statement, the number of people that they can call out onto the streets has diminished considerably.
Professor Dabashi, first of all, do you agree? And second, Do you think Ahmadinejad is going to have to depend ever more on the Revolutionary Guards to quell the demonstrations, because apparently he did lose legitimacy in the eyes of
I believe so, but I do also believe that what we are witnessing is a serious delegitimation of the office of presidency. And my reading also of the movement is not a revolution intended to topple the regime, but is the beginning of a civil rights movement. We have to look at it. Whatever the final result of this crisis might be, whoever is the president, Mousavi, Ahmadinejad, etc., will be the legitimate representation in terms of foreign policies, etc. But in terms of domestic situation, my belief is the commencement of this civil rights movement has thrown a monkey wrench in the regional politics up until when we didn't have this. That is not because of the way that Islamic Republic had acted very wisely, but because of the ill-advised operation of the Bush administration in the region. Iran had emerged as a regional power.
Robert Malley, you authored a special report in Iran recently. First of all, have you expected anything like that would happen? And second, do you think President Ahmadinejad would be ousted by any stretch of imagination?
No, I did not expect it. I don't know how many people did. I don't think Ahmadinejad will be toppled, although, frankly, when movements like this begin, you know when they begin, you really don't know where they're going to end, and they only appear inevitable in hindsight. So I don't want to be too speculative about it. It does seem to me that there is a rift within the regime. It seems to me that there is the fissures which have existed for a long time between an axis centered around Rafsanjani and more recently one centered around Ahmadinejad. That's a historic crisis or conflict within the regime that has now taken a much more acute expression. And when you have the combination of that and what's happening in the street, you don't know where it's going to lead. But I think the safest bet would be, and that's why we hear President Obama saying what he's saying, the safest bet is to assume that the regime will not change, and that, as Flint says, those who will be in power tomorrow are grosso modo the same as those who have been in power yesterday, and so we have to preserve the ability to engage with them. But from an outside perspective, I must say it looks like something profound is happening in Iran, and this is a watershed, even if we don't see the immediate repercussions tomorrow.
I want to get back to you, Professor Farhan, but just before that, I'm curious, Flint, you were a Middle East analyst at the CIA. Did the CIA expect this?
I have no idea what the CIA expected in terms of this election.
It's been surprised, huh? Recently a lot. I mean, surprised all too often.
Yes, and the CIA was surprised in '97 when Khatami won, just like I think most of the rest of the world, and perhaps even the Supreme Leader himself was surprised when Khatami won. No, I would be surprised to learn that the CIA had forecast this.
You see, it's very important to think about public opinion as a variable in this whole situation, particularly for a regime that has been propagating populistic values and trying to establish its legitimacy on the basis of the popular will. Ahmadinejad ran for president 4.5 years ago. He said next to nothing about foreign policy issues. He focused on poverty, inequality, nepotism, corruption, drug addiction. If you did not know Iran, you would assume that this guy is running against the regime. Who was in charge for 26 years?
His regime.
His regime, exactly. And yet, once he won, Iran, over the past 4 years, due to the increase in the oil prices, Iran has received $296 billion in oil revenues. Fantastic and unprecedented in terms of oil revenues for the country.
But did he squander it?
He has spent it in order to buy influence and satisfy certain sectors of the population through subsidies and charitable activities. But overall, when we go to the economic indicators of the country, with respect to gross national product, with respect to employment, with respect to unemployment, on and on and on, in every sense of the word, including distribution of wealth and income, the country is worse off today than it was 4 or 8 years ago. Therefore, Ahmadinejad, as a populist, has failed to satisfy the expectations he created during his campaign.
Well, but he certainly succeeded in upsetting a lot of people around the world, which we will discuss in the second half, right when we come back after the break.